Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Imagine for a moment what would happen if we all lost internet connections. Shock horror. For some of us, terrifying, frankly. For those who don't go online much, then perhaps at first glance, not much of an issue. But just about every business we rely on relies in turn on the internet. And then, of course, there's national security. So when a former director of the GCHQ listening station told News at 10 our undersea internet connections are potentially vulnerable to attack, that did sound a bit worrying.
The World Wide Web still relies on a real-world network of undersea cables. The UK is especially reliant on this network, and typically these cables come ashore together in remote locations like Bude and Porthcurno in Cornwall. The cable landfalls are largely unprotected, as are the undersea routes. And responding to a new analysis of submarine cables today, the former director of GCHQ told News at 10 just how exposed they are.
They're very vulnerable in the sense that they're sitting there on the seabed largely unprotected, and they occasionally get broken by accident, by fishing trawlers, for example. But it's very possible that some states, in particular Russia, could set out to cut them. And there's a history of cutting cables.
How damaging would it be to the British economy and to society were the cables to be cut?
We know it will be very damaging. Potentially, the economy could grind to a halt, particularly financial services, if you cut enough of those cables. And there aren't that many landing sites in the UK. But if you cut the key cables, you would cease to be able to use the internet. We would become a very small, dark island.
When Russia annexed the Crimea, one of the first things its shadowy forces did was cut digital communications. And now the Russians are thought to have the technology to reach cables in the deep sea. This is the Yantar, a Russian naval vessel equipped with submersibles ostensibly for underwater research. The Yantar has been reported operating near Atlantic cable routes.
I think what we see is a more aggressive intelligence and espionage posture by the Russian Federation to include influence operations, which have been discussed a lot recently in North America and Europe. And I think fiber optic cables would fall under an anticipated target of all that kind of activity as well.
Undersea cables are privately owned and operated, but the government says it's working with industry to ensure they're secure and has a variety of tools to monitor hostile activity. The author of today's report thinks more can be done.
Firstly, when cables come ashore at remote villages, we should protect those sites the same way that we protect nuclear power stations or military facilities. Secondly, cable companies could install monitoring equipment on the cables at sea. And lastly, we need to make sure that our Navy has the resources that it needs to protect cables at sea.
It's not thought there's an imminent threat to Britain's cable network. The issue is whether the UK's links to the world would be safe against a future attack, and whether we would even see one coming.